After I signed their deed and they cheered, they drove me to DFW and left me at gate 17 like forgotten luggage. I folded my hands, watched the clock, and waited for the exact moment their celebration would detonate on contact with reality. You're watching Revenge Files. Subscribe for a new twist daily. 60 minutes later, my screen lit with 18 missed calls, the consequence of a tiny legal adjustment I'd made 2 days earlier. The house they thought they owned now belonged to a trust I controlled, and I wasn't boarding any flight. I am 62 years old, and for most of my adult life I've been the kind of mother who carries a tote bag stuffed with snacks, insurance cards, and everyone's spare chargers. Caleb, my only child, grew up knowing that I would pick up any call, drive in any weather, and sign any permission slip that crossed the counter. When his father died in 2019, silent heart attack in the garage, I paid the funeral home invoice with a trembling hand and told our son, "You focus on the job hunt, I'll handle the rest." The house in Plano became my anchor. 3 bedrooms, 1 creaky hallway, a magnolia we planted when Caleb was 10. I kept the property tax paid on time. I replaced the HVAC in March 2022. I set the sprinkler timers and learned how to unjam the dishwasher. Every small act said, "You are not alone." I believed love worked like filters in the AC register, silent, steady, doing the job no one sees. But grief changes more than the air. Caleb drifted toward Amber, the woman he would later marry, and she drifted toward the parts of him I didn't recognize. She spoke about leverage more than love. She called me Evelyn instead of Mom. She asked casual questions that weren't casual. How much equity did I have? Whether I'd ever consider downsizing, whether I knew how gnarly probate gets in Texas. I smiled and stirred coffee. I also bought a notebook. By June 2023, those questions sharpened into a plan. They rang my doorbell at 8:03 on a Friday and stood on the porch with pastries and a bright blue folder. "You'll thank us," Amber said. "We found a way to protect the house from the state when you pass. It's a simple trust transfer, totally standard." Caleb added, "It keeps out creditors, Mom. We looked it up." I've been a librarian for 3 decades. "We looked it up" is a phrase that opens 1,000 doors to bad information. I asked to keep the documents for a weekend. I brewed tea. I read the fine print with a magnifying lamp I'd bought for quilting. I used sticky notes like flags in a battlefield. What they'd brought wasn't a simple trust transfer. It was a gift deed to Caleb and Amber, effective the day I signed. No life estate reserved, no consideration, no safeguards, a neat ribbon of thanks for 37 years of paying mortgages, replacing roofs, and mowing the lawn under a July sun. I slept 4 hours that night and dreamt of empty rooms. The next morning I drove to the Collin County Courthouse, then across to a strip mall where a mobile notary kept office hours. A young woman named Lindsay took my ID and witnessed 3 signatures. For $85 and a $26 recording fee, I moved the house into the Evelyn Doyle Living Trust, dated March 12, 2022, amended July 13, 2023, with me as trustee and life tenant. I had read about enhanced life estate deeds. Texas doesn't call them that everywhere, but the point was clean. I wasn't giving up control while I lived. I could revoke, sell, or refinance. I could change beneficiaries, and anyone who thought otherwise would learn the difference between a grin and a snare. I did not tell Caleb or Amber. I did not need a fight at my dining table. I paid the notary, filed the documents, and stopped for groceries like any other Saturday. Except 2 days later, they arrived with a second folder and a careful performance. "Let's celebrate first," Amber insisted, digging flutes out of my cabinet. "We'll sign and go get lunch at that place by the mall." Caleb had that tight smile I used to see before he asked for an advance on his allowance. He'd learned to hide the ask under a compliment. "You look great, Mom." I glanced at the pages and recognized their template, now with the notary block clipped on. I took a pen. I signed the deed they'd brought, my name in the same loops I'd practiced in high school, because sometimes you let people build their own stage. The witnesses clapped. Amber popped a can of something sparkling and sticky. "You did the right thing," she said, hugging me for the first time in months. Then she adjusted her plan mid-hug. "Surprise," she chirped. "We actually booked you a flight to Orlando to visit Aunt Maggie for a week. We'll drive you right now. Our treat." I blinked. I haven't packed. You don't need to, she said. I Amazoned you a suitcase. It's at Maggie's. Caleb can grab you toothpaste at the airport. He jingled my car keys and said, Let's go. At DFW, they walked me to security like attentive children. Amber squeezed my shoulders at the stanchions. We'll drop by the house and start getting the carpet guys in, she said, throwing the words like rice at a wedding. We'll FaceTime tonight. Love you. Then they were gone, a happy couple sliding up the escalator, their reflection doubling in the glass. I moved to gate 17 and sat. The boarding pass they'd bought read 1:20 p.m., but I had no plan to step onto that plane. I had eaten half a pretzel when my phone buzzed with an automated email. Your e-recording has been accepted. Instrument 20,230,713,000,1234. I forwarded it to myself, printed to PDF, and scheduled an email to Caleb and Amber with 3 attachments: the recorded trust transfer deed, the trust certificate naming me as trustee, and a calm 6-sentence note. The delay was set for precisely 12:05 p.m. At 12:06, my phone vibrated like a trapped bee. 1 missed call. 3, 7, 18. I let them stack. I knew exactly what they were seeing, an email time-stamped 1 hour after they dropped me, proving the house wasn't theirs to remodel, rent, or refinance. My note said, I signed your paper today. It does not convey title you do not own. The house has been held by my trust since July 13th. Please stop by tomorrow at 10 a.m. to return my keys. A gate agent announced a delay. People groaned. I opened my tote, pulled out a paperback, and read the same paragraph twice without absorbing it. The truth of the moment pressed in on both sides, like the body of an elevator. The thing they had cheered for an hour earlier now lay heavy in their hands, weight without handle. I did what I always do when the ground shifts. I made lists. When the 18th call ended, I texted one line to both, put anything you move back. Then I called a Lyft. I had no suitcase. I had a house to protect. The driver dropped me 2 blocks away. I cut through my neighbor's yard and came up the alley, where our Ring camera caught the backs of Caleb and Amber in my driveway, both on their phones, moving with the frantic choreography of people caught miscounting. I watched from the shadow of the magnolia, felt something old and maternal twist in my ribs, and then I walked up and pressed the key fob. The garage door opened like a curtain. Amber turned, composure scraped raw. Evelyn, she said, we were just leaving, I answered. Because you don't live here. Caleb tried to soften it. Mom, we can talk about this. We will, I said. Tomorrow at 10. Bring the keys. They didn't like the tone, but they left. Their exit felt smaller than their entrance, the way a storm breaks apart in the rearview mirror. I closed the garage, walked inside, and set the air to 76 because the house had gotten warm with adrenaline. I made tea. I turned on every light. But then, at 6:31 p.m., my neighbor, Rosa, knocked with a concerned face. They posted your house, she said, showing me her phone. There it was on Facebook Marketplace, 3 bedrooms, $2,400 a month, move-in ready. New owners can show Sunday afternoon. Photos taken from my public listing years ago. My address in bold. Amber had already replied to 2 inquiries with, we can meet at 3 p.m. Bring deposit. I took screenshots until my finger hurt. I filed a fraud report with Facebook and sent a takedown notice. I documented their posts, comments, and every message. I emailed Caleb and Amber, take down the ad. Cease any representation that you own or manage 1415 Brooklawn. You will return keys at 10 a.m. tomorrow. If you don't, I will change the locks at noon. Then I called a locksmith and booked the first slot on Sunday. I slept with the hallway light on. The house creaked the way it always creaks, the way a living thing turns over in its sleep, and I let that comfort me. The clock on the stove glowed unfriendly numbers until the day turned. Sunday at 10:07 a.m., they arrived late, cased in thin politeness. Amber handed over 2 keys and kept a third, the small act of defiance you'd expect from a person who believes she's still winning. I opened my palm, all of them. She stared. I spoke again, quiet. All. Caleb reached into his pocket and took out a key ring. He slid off the third key and placed it in my hand like a coin on a plate. We didn't mean to. You did, I said. That is the point. At noon, the locksmith replaced both deadbolts and rekeyed the side door. He charged $189 and finished in 40 minutes. I added his invoice to a folder I'd labeled Calebamber, July, and wrote 3 bullet points on the inside cover: keys, listing, abandonment. Then I printed my photos and stapled their timestamps together like stitches. By Monday, I had appointments. One with a legal aid clinic at the church on Arapahoe Road, another with a private attorney recommended by a woman in my quilting group. The clinic gave me vocabulary for what had happened: undue influence, attempted conversion, elder financial exploitation. The attorney gave me a price and a plan. You don't need to sue for ownership, she said, tapping the trust papers. You already have it. You need a protective order, a declaratory judgment, and a cease and desist that bites. The retainer was $5,000. I wrote the check because some numbers are less than peace. We filed a petition on July 24 for a temporary restraining order against harassment and misrepresentation of ownership, plus a request for declaratory relief confirming the trust's title. We attached exhibits, the recorded deed, screenshots of the rental ad, my ring clips, and a transcript of the airport drop-off where Amber chirped about carpet guys. Caleb texted that night, "So you're really doing this to your own son?" I stared at the screen until the letters looked like beads in a child's craft kit. Then I wrote back, "I am doing this for your mother." The next morning, the court granted a temporary restraining order ex parte, good for 14 days, ordering Caleb and Amber to stop representing themselves as owners or agents, to return any remaining keys, and to stay 200 feet from the house unless accompanied by law enforcement for a 10-minute pickup of personal items. The order felt like a sandbag on the levee. Water pounded, but the edge held. Except, a day later, a couple in a white SUV pulled into my driveway, knocked, and tried to hand me $2,400 in cash. "We're here for the rental," the woman said. Amber said today, I used the breath I had to speak slowly. "You're being scammed. Please file a police report." I stepped back inside and called the number Amber had used in her messages, straight to voicemail. I looped the incident into my file. The hearing date landed like a nail, August 8th, Collin County Court at Law Number 3, 9 a.m. I counted the days and stored my energy. The night before, I ironed a navy blouse and placed my exhibits in order inside a red binder with tabs, A through H. I slept 5 hours. I dreamt of airport gates, of people with wheeled suitcases who kept walking without looking up. Court is just a room with chairs until it isn't. The judge took the bench and began with a tone that suggested he'd seen worse and would rather not. When our case was called, my attorney stood and introduced me as petitioner and trustee. Amber came in a small suit, Caleb in a jacket he'd borrowed from high school graduation. They sat to my left and talked with urgent, whispering mouths. My attorney's questions punctured the story cleanly. "What is this document?" she asked, pointing to the recorded deed. "When was it recorded? Who is the trustee? What rights did Emmis Doyle reserve?" I answered, "This is the trust transfer deed dated July 13, 2023, recorded as instrument in 20,230,713,001,234. I am trustee and life tenant. I reserved control while alive, including the right to sell or revoke." She moved to Exhibit C, the rental ad. "Do you recognize this?" "Yes." "Was it posted by you?" "No." "Did you authorize it?" "No." The judge's eyes flicked to the screen. He took notes. Then came the ring videos. The courtroom speakers crackled with ambient suburban noise, trucks passing, birds, the irregular clack of someone walking with intention. The footage showed Caleb taking photos through my front window. It showed Amber describing carpet replacements. It showed the airport drop where she squeezed my shoulders and said, "We'll face time tonight," as the camera caught the word owners forming on her lips. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice level. "I didn't know until they left me at the gate," I said. "I scheduled the email because I didn't want a fight in my house." The judge asked, "Why the airport?" I said because abusers like to move people where they feel small. I wanted witnesses and I wanted time, Amber testified next. Her story stuttered, switching lanes when the facts narrowed. We were just trying to avoid probate, she said. We thought we were helping. The deed we had her sign, she signed voluntarily. My attorney asked, "Did you tell Ms. Doyle you would list the house for rent that same day?" Amber blinked. "We were exploring options," the judge said without looking up. Options often have price tags. Caleb approached the stand with more emotion and less strategy. He spoke about being a child with a roof that didn't leak, about his father's death, about feeling like the man of the house. He said, "I thought I was protecting what he built. I watched his hands, the way he clenched them not to cry. I knew those hands. I had held them when he was 3 and afraid of thunder." When it ended, the judge read his findings. The words fell into the room with a gravity that pulled us all. First, he said, "The court finds that title to the property at 1415 Brooklawn is held by the Evelyn Doyle Living Trust, dated March 12, 2022, as amended July 13, 2023, with M.S. Doyle as trustee and life tenant. The instrument offered by respondents on July 15, purporting to be a gift deed, conveys no interest in property not held by the grantor at that time and is void with respect to title. Second, the court issues a 1-year protective order prohibiting respondents from harassing petitioner, representing themselves as owners or agents of the property, or entering upon the premises without petitioner's written consent. Violation will be punishable by contempt. Third, respondents shall deliver to petitioner all remaining keys, remotes, and codes within 24 hours and shall remove any online listings or advertisements relating to the property. Within 14 days, respondents shall reimburse petitioner $189 for locksmith charges, $450 for legal filing fees, and $2,400 representing deposits obtained under misrepresentation, if any, to be held in trust for refund to affected parties. Finally, costs of court are taxed against respondents. He signed the order with a blue pen that looked too cheerful for the task. The clerk stamped the pages. My attorney exhaled. The gavel didn't bang, it just landed. But then, 3 weeks after the order, I received an alert from the appraisal district. Someone had filed a homestead change on my address, attempting to remove my exemption. The form listed a new mailing address, Caleb's apartment in Frisco, and a checkbox claiming owner no longer occupies, a signature that looked almost like mine angled across the bottom. I drove to the district office with the court order and my driver's license. A clerk named Henry checked the file, frowned, and flagged the change as fraudulent. He restored my exemption and added a note to the account requiring in-person verification for any future alteration. "Happens more than you think," he said, sliding my papers back. "People try to move money with ink." I added this stunt to my binder, tab I. 2 days later, a man in a ball cap knocked at 8 p.m. and asked if the open house was still on. He held a printout from a website I hadn't heard of, with my living room in a thumbnail. I stood on my porch in a sweater and said, "No, sir." He apologized and left. I traced the listing back to a burner account and screenshotted everything. My attorney filed a motion for contempt with the court. The hearing was short. The judge's voice had less patience. He fined Caleb $500, suspended conditioned on compliance. "You're the son," he said. "Act like it." In September, I made a new appointment that wasn't about defense. I took a bus to the bank and met with a trust officer to add a small scholarship clause to my documents, $1,000 a year to a single mom at Plano Senior High who loved books. The trust officer asked why. I told her a true thing in a soft voice. "Because the people who love you don't always bring bread," I said. "Sometimes you have to ensure the loaf exists." Meanwhile, the neighborhood adjusted around me. Rosa brought over soup. Mr. Lee across the street installed a brighter bulb in the alley. The woman in the white SUV filed her police report and dropped off a copy baked into a lemon bar tin. We formed a little net you wouldn't notice unless you fell. One night Caleb called from a number I didn't recognize. I answered. "Mom," he said, "we're getting hammered. The judge, this whole thing, it's ruining us." I sat at the kitchen table with the magnolia's shadow on the wall. "You worked very hard to get here," I said. Silence widened. Then he said, "Amber's pregnant." That landed like a pebble in a glass. My mind threw 100 images on the wall: a crib, a tiny pink hat, a boy with dark hair, the whirl of joy and need. My heart reached, as it always would, to the child. But the present required a different grip. "Then fix yourself before that child arrives," I answered. "Return deposits, stop lying, learn the difference between your mother and her house." Thanksgiving came. I made sweet potatoes and pecan pie and put a plate on the magnolia bench for my husband. I texted Caleb a simple invitation: dinner at 3. You can come if you respect my rules. He did not show. The food tasted like something eaten during a task rather than a tradition. I washed dishes and watched the streetlights come on. December brought a heavy, cold snap, and with it another small act of sabotage that almost slid by. My gas bill doubled. I checked the meter. The technician found that someone had left the garage door open and turned the heat up to 80 while I was at church. The camera footage was grainy, but the figure looked familiar in the way a memory looks familiar. Outline, gait, the way the shoulder tightens when cold air hits an old injury from baseball camp. I sent the clip to my attorney and to the police, who added it as an incident under the protective order. Another sandbag, another inch of kept water. In February, the mid-roll surge I hadn't expected came through the mailbox. A 1,099% tax form from a payment processor I'd never used, issued to Heartside Homes, LLC, with my address as principal place of business. It listed $9,750 in gross payments. My hands went cold. The LLC didn't exist in the Secretary of State database, but a search of county assumed names showed a DBA filed by Caleb 2 weeks earlier. They had built a fake business and threaded my address through it to look legitimate. I called the number on the 1099. A man named Jeremy at the processor explained that they had flagged chargebacks on rental deposits. He confirmed the phone number tied to the merchant account, Caleb's. He asked for documentation, and I sent the order, the trust certificate, and the fraud report number. He froze the account and initiated clawbacks. He also provided something I hadn't known to ask for: IP logs showing where the account had been accessed. Frisco, a coffee shop on Preston Road. A midnight login from a phone near my house on the night of the open house. We filed another motion for contempt and a report for identity theft. The judge's patience thinned to transparency. He extended the protective order, added a $1,000 sanction payable to the court, and ordered Caleb to complete a financial responsibility class within 60 days. "You cannot run pharmacy theft through a church bake sale and call it a fundraiser," he said. "That's what you've done here. Stop." Caleb looked small in the hallway afterward. For a moment, I saw my boy at 7 with a split lip from a neighbor kid's elbow, angry at the wrong details. I thought of reaching out. I did not. Sometimes, love looks like a door you keep closed, because the wind on the other side will flatten a person. The year turned. The house held. I redid the front bedroom, painted it a clean white, bought a daybed with drawers for quilts. I put up a shelf for the old cameras my husband used to collect. The magnolia bloomed early in March, reckless and beautiful, and I hosted 3 women from the library for tea. We ate store-bought lemon bars and talked about mysteries. One afternoon in April, a letter arrived from a lawyer I didn't know, representing Amber. The tone was earnest and edged. "My client seeks a mediated path forward to restore family relationships." It suggested mutual non-disparagement and a limited visitation schedule for a child I had not yet met, contingent on me refraining from discussing legal matters. I read it 3 times. I drafted a response with my attorney that said I would not sign away my right to the truth for any form of access. I added one line at the end in my own words: "I will be here when honesty arrives." May 2nd brought the final hearing on the declaratory relief. The judge entered a written order confirming title in the trust, voiding the July 15 gift deed for lack of interest, and awarding me $2,639 in fees and costs, in addition to the earlier amounts. He wrote a paragraph that I printed and taped inside the cabinet, where I keep the good plates. "A person may love her family and also protect herself. These acts are not opposites. I am not proud of the part of me that wanted a cinematic apology, some operatic moment where Caleb realized he had been walking through a house of mirrors and broke out into sun. Real life offers smaller stones. In June, I got a text with a hospital photo, a baby with a red, sleepy face, a cap resting too big on a soft head. "This is Ari," the caption read. It came from a number I didn't recognize. I wrote back, "Welcome, Ari. I hope your life is full of kindness." I put my phone down and cried into a dish towel because hope and grief sometimes share a kitchen. I met Ari once in late August, in a park crowded with birthday balloons for another child. Amber stood 6 feet away, arms crossed like she'd rather hug a cactus. Caleb held the baby a little awkwardly and smiled without showing teeth. I wore a navy sweater and brought a small book wrapped in brown paper, a chair for my mother, which I had checked out and then bought for 100 students over 3 decades. He took it. "Thanks," he said. "She'll like the pictures." I nodded. "She might like the ending more." Before we left, Caleb said, "Mom, we're in counseling." I said, "Good." He said, "I got a job at a warehouse." I said, "Good." He said, "Can we, maybe, think about Thanksgiving?" I said, "We can think." It was not reconciliation, it was a pencil mark on a door jamb, proof someone was growing even if the height wasn't what you wanted. In September, the appraisal district mailed a renewal of my senior exemption, and I walked it in to Henry like a person honoring a ritual. He stamped the paper and said, "How are you doing, Ms. Doyle?" I said, "I am all right." He said, "That's a good answer." It was. I keep the binder on a shelf near the kitchen, a red spine I don't love to look at. Inside are invoices and orders, screenshots and correspondence, the thin paper of official mistakes compressed by a stapler. I also keep something else, the boarding pass to Orlando that I never used, still crisp where it printed out of my home office, 1:20 p.m., July 15, 2023. It reminds me of a gate where I sat alone and chose not to be carried. Some nights, when the air goes quiet in that way you only notice when you live alone, I walk to the hallway and touch the wall where my husband leaned after mowing the lawn. I say, "We're okay." I say, "I kept us." The magnolia rustles outside the window like applause you only hear when you stop performing for people who never bought tickets. If you ask how revenge fits into all this, I will pick up my mug, sip, and talk about paperwork. I will talk about how the cleanest cuts don't leave blood, they leave official copies. I will tell you that I did not raise a boy to be a bailiff, but I did raise myself to be a trustee, which means you hold what you hold until it's time to set it down. I set down the part where I begged to be seen. I picked up the part where I saw myself. On the day the court mailed the certified copy of the final order, I walked to the curb and met the mailman. He handed me the envelope and said, "Feels important." I smiled. "It is." I signed the green card, carried the packet inside, and slid it under the binder's strap. The house sighed around me, the way houses do when the air changes pressure. I drew the blinds half closed. I checked the lock. I poured water for the magnolia. And sometimes, Friday afternoons, when flights overhead carve white lines into the blue, I think about that hour at gate A17. How small I felt on a plastic chair while their joy ran a block ahead of truth. And I let myself smile. Not because they called 18 times, in a row, but because I took the call that mattered. I answered myself. I said, "Stand up," and I did.